Before anything really got going today, the judge reminded the jury that questions are not evidence. This kind of pushes back on the defense asking questions the way they do. Today, they did start getting into evidence on Officer O'Keefe's clothing, and I'm going to save that for a separate video, partly because there's a lot to talk about, and partly because I want to do some experiments before I record a video. The first witness today was Lieutenant Kevin O'Hara with the state police. He is part of SERT, the Special Emergency Response Team. As he testified, I realized very quickly, this is not the same as CSI. And I think as you go through the evidence, or if you watched his testimony today, it's important to keep in mind that distinction. SERT does SAR, so search and rescue. They do evidence search. This is different from a CSI search where they're doing the search, they're documenting the scene, they're documenting the evidence collection, they're collecting evidence, packaging it, photographing it, measuring it, the diagrams, all that you would expect from a CSI team. This is not within SERT's wheelhouse. What they do is they help find it, but they're not responsible for collecting it and documenting it and mapping out the scene, etc., etc. And this guy, O'Hara, got put on the hot seat for some things that he's not really responsible for. However, I think the defense didn't have a choice but to push back on some of these things. And I'm wondering why there was never an actual CSI team sent to Fairview. Why was the scene not preserved? That's shocking to me. And is there going to be an instruction by the judge as to chain of custody of evidence and integrity of evidence, preserving the scene, and how much weight should be attached to any of the items that they found at an unsecured scene? O'Hara testified that on January 29th, he was contacted by Lieutenant Tully at 2:32 p.m. And that was surprising too. Officer O'Keefe was found shortly after 6 a.m. Canton Police left the scene hours earlier. So why was it not preserved or at least guarded and logged until another search team takes over? And this call to O'Hara at 2:32 p.m. was just a courtesy call, basically to give him a heads up that they're going to probably get called out to this scene at Fairview. And the witness said that he would have to go up the chain of command before they could actually respond. He was told that this was a death investigation and Canton Police wanted services for evidence search. And again, I need to note here, this is not the same as taking over the investigation or taking over responsibility of the scene or responsibility for scene preservation or actually collecting evidence or any of that. It's simply an assistance call. And I'll also note that they have SAR training. It's not nearly the same as CSI training. I have SAR training, and I'm telling you, it's not nearly the same. At 2:53, there was an alert in their system letting them know that they were going to have to respond. At 3:48, they were finally ready to respond to Fairview. But it wasn't until 4:10 that they actually got the address from Tully, and it took them 43 minutes to arrive because of the weather. They originally dispatched 8 SERT team members, but one couldn't get off of his street, so only 7 could actually get there. Another trooper arrived 2 minutes before O'Hara, and Lieutenant Tully was not on scene when they arrived. O'Hara called Tully, who arrived around 5 p.m. O'Hara did not see anyone outside, which also means there was nobody guarding that scene. While he was there, an adult male exited the house at Fairview and asked if they were there for the incident from earlier. He answered yes to this man, and the man walked back into the house. Recall that when Brian Albert was on the stand, he was asked why he didn't go outside. And he said, well, because John was already gone. There was nothing I could do. But now there are officials there conducting a search, and an adult male does come out of the house to ask questions. O'Hara testified that Lieutenant Tully told him that the investigation involved a motor vehicle. He testified that SERT is a stage 2 response, and they're usually not the first to search a scene. They're usually second, and their training is very different. Again, the training is search. It's not CSI. They are very different. It was Tully who directed the team where to search, and this issue will come up again for a couple of different reasons. They conducted a line search, and they searched about 59 feet. They searched from the front door to the area of the flagpole. So that means there was no search done of any interiors, of the path to the side gate, the backyard. You get the picture. Lieutenant Tully specifically told them to look for tail light. Well, this is very specific. His testimony was he found 1 or 2 pieces of tail light. He was asked if he had seen photographs of Reed's SUV and the damaged area, and he said he did not. The witness said that his understanding was that around that time, Trooper Proctor was following the SUV. It was en route to Canton PD. He said they used shovels and rakes and a push broom. You know, I noticed they didn't have sifters or heating elements or anything like that. So a shovel seems like a blunt instrument, so to speak. And all of this would be okay for a SAR search, for a search and rescue search. But for a detailed evidence search, well, it's a different procedure. So this is a bit wild. He said it was dark on scene. Well, yeah, it's after 5 o'clock at night before they're even there. In the winter, it's going to be dark. Why were they not called out much, much earlier? He said that while they were searching, they did not have good visibility in respect to what they were moving, which means they could have been destroying evidence no matter how careful they're being. Then it came out there were 5 other people there dressed in civilian clothing who he understood to be police. And Lally just sort of glossed over that part and moved on. O'Hara said because they don't actually collect or log evidence, they just help find it. It was Tully who was supposed to log and photograph everything. He was asked about multiple pieces of red and clear tail light. He said they were on the street between the hydrant and the flagpole, but you're going to see in a minute from photographs that they weren't all on the street. He said he found 3 large pieces of tail light, 1 clear, 2 red pieces, as well as 2 smaller pieces. He said he found a sneaker between the pole and the hydrant, but it was on the road flush against the curb. And of course, when you see these pictures, there is no marker, no measuring implement. There's nothing there for scale. The process of uncovering the items is not shown. There is no map to scale of the search area and the surrounding area. So you remember earlier, somebody at the scene in the morning had cleared part of the curb to show where the curb was? Well, exactly where was that sneaker found in relation to that curb? You know what? We're not going to know. And they talked about arrival time. And Lally was pretty general. Everybody was there by 6:15 p.m. And they don't say who found each piece of evidence. He says we. So who found each piece? What time? And it's not there. It's not indicated. The witness said he felt that it was likely they didn't find everything, and he told Tully they would return if they were asked. He was asked if Proctor and Proctor's partner were there, and he said no. And as he's going through his testimony, he keeps trying to let them know, look, we don't recover evidence. That's not what we do. He said that Lieutenant Tully told him that Tully was recovering and documenting each piece of evidence. As far as locations, SERT uses a Garmin GPS and they upload it to a map. And that's great for search and rescue. But when you're dealing with an area that's smaller and there are items of evidence close together and you may need to do a reconstruction, a Garmin is not going to cut it. There's a range of error on those things. And even a couple of inches in error for the location of something at a crime scene can make a huge difference. Again, if you're out in the woods and you find somebody's hat or something, well, the GPS then is good enough. But for this application, it is not. They show a photo of the area dug up. You can see in this picture a piece of tail light. And the witness said that this was uncovered as they turned over the shovel. So they scooped the shovel underneath it, turn over the shovel, and boom, there's this piece on top. And you can see the shovel marks in the snow. Well, is this the area that was blown with the leaf blower? How come they didn't find that? And because it came up in a shovel full of snow, you can't tell where it was sitting exactly or how much snow exactly was under it. And again, there's no measuring tool to show anything. They show a photo of a sneaker and you can see it's flush against the curb. And the sneaker is buried, but there's snow encasing the whole thing. Again, no measurements. They show a photo of the clear tail light. And in one of the photos, the tail light is sitting upright, sort of like wedged in the snow. If at the time that tail light landed on the ground, considering there was little to no snow on the ground at the time of the alleged motor vehicle incident, well, then that piece of tail light should be flat on the ground, not perched upright. There would have been nothing to hold it upright, to suspend it like that. And if the argument is, well, it was moved because people are shoveling, well, then you're going to have to accept that that's an argument for absolutely every other piece of evidence too. They showed a photo of a piece of red taillight, or what appears to be taillight, and the light is on the ground on pavement. When was the last time that area was plowed? Because if it was plowed, then that piece of light shouldn't be on the ground at all. And they show GPS locations, but the range of error on a good day, clear day, assuming that the operator is handling the GPS properly, is 16 feet. And on a day when it's not clear, like that day, the range of error can be much greater. And for all of these pieces of evidence, there is a need to compare them with precisely where O'Keefe was found and with where the SUV was seen and where they believe the collision occurred. I mean, you don't have to be an accident reconstructionist to know that 16 feet is a pretty big range of error at a crime scene like that. How do you tell anything? Now, again, I'm going to mention these guys using their GPS, these guys are search and rescue. But that's not this. Also, the team was told that it was a motor vehicle accident. So that means they would not search a wider range than what they're being told, such as the back gate, the backyard, etc. And Lally twice brought up the concept of probability of detection. And this does two things. One, it provides an explanation for why they left, but it also lays the foundation if Lally wants to introduce evidence found later. On cross-examination, the defense sort of clarified some things, so this was helpful. They clarified it was 2:32 p.m. when Tully called O'Hara. Proctor was in the same unit as Tully. The snow had been falling heavily since that morning. There had been 8 hours worth of snowfall. The witness confirmed that he was told specifically that he was looking for taillight. And this is very specific. I would expect that he would be told to look for anything out of place. And if they were going to be specific, then taillight, plastic, piece of a car, right? Did he tell him hat? Did he tell him sneaker? The defense asked him about crime scene integrity in general terms. And I think the witness wasn't really sure what the defense was getting at. This is not this witness's area. And finally, the witness said, it would be my preference that the scene was preserved. Yeah. The witness was not aware that no one was controlling the scene, that the scene had been abandoned, all of that. Not aware of that. But again, the guy's just doing his job. He's asked to go out. He goes out. They say, this is where we want you to look. This is what we want you to look for. And so they look. And before anybody craps on Lieutenant O'Hara, I want to point out again, he is doing his job. The failures here were not O'Hara's. They were failures of other people. So the defense brings out the point that at 7:50 a.m., the scene had been abandoned. And it was never, ever really preserved. I mean, Carrie Roberts is seen on dash cam going to where O'Keefe had been laying and picking up her blankets and putting them back in her vehicle. She shouldn't have been allowed to touch anything. That was evidence. She also, according to her testimony, picked up O'Keefe's cell phone. Nobody stopped her. Nobody asked her questions. She shouldn't have been allowed to even be near there. This witness, O'Hara, confirmed no one was guarding the scene when he got there. Even though he was notified by Tully at 2:32 p.m., the actual alert sent wasn't until 2:53 p.m., and that alert still wasn't even a dispatch alert. It was just an alert to say, hey, get ready, make sure you're available. And they had not actually been activated, and included in the alert was that there was no green light yet. The witness said it took 43 minutes to arrive even after they were finally okayed. The defense presented O'Hara with a document that showed time for things, including when they were alerted to just be available. And he noted there was no timestamp for when SERT was activated and en route. Well, that's really interesting. Now, why? But this witness was pretty good because he knows that there was an alert at 3:48 p.m. to dispatch. That's nearly an hour after they're told to get ready. Why does it take so long to dispatch? When I ask that question, I am cognizant of the fact that they need to get authorization. Both Tully and O'Hara have to go through a chain of command to get authorization to go. But an hour is a long time when we're talking about an emergency response here. The defense asked him, other than authorization, do you know what changed? I think he was talking about who was on duty. And the witness didn't know what he was talking about. And the witness said, other than the authorization changing, he doesn't know if anything changed. And again, we get into official reports being wrong. This is a big problem. When an official report is wrong by a couple of minutes, it usually doesn't matter, especially if everybody is manually entering things. You're going to see differences of a couple of minutes. But this report is substantially wrong. The witness testified that on the status report, their arrival times are manually added. So it's not an automatic computer thing. The report says that this witness arrived at 5 p.m., that one other team member arrived 5 minutes earlier, and that everybody else arrived about the same time, except that's not correct. And again, the witness is helpful because he tells them the arrival times were 5:21, 5:24, 5:34, 5:41. So they weren't arriving all at the same time. This is a significant difference. He agreed, yeah, it was dark out when they arrived, and it was darker when they were able to get started because they had to wait for everybody to get there. He said they designated his cruiser as the command station, and he had parked it in front of the driveway at 34, and it was facing the wrong way. So he did end up turning it around at one point so he would be able to use the headlights to illuminate the area better. And there were 5 other officers present, and they were all in civilian clothes. And Lieutenant O'Hara recognized 2 of them, but did not know who 3 of them were. Well, who were they then? And what are they doing? It comes out that it was Tully who directed the team to where O'Keefe was found. Well, this is important because if Tully was not present when John O'Keefe was there, he couldn't accurately state where O'Keefe was found. Also, there were no measurements done initially at the scene. When Canton Police first had the scene, there was no scene log as far as we've heard. There was testimony that when Carrie Roberts was leaving, that an officer said, hey, you got to give me your phone number. So that was good. But aside from that, this scene was not guarded, even while there were people, including witnesses, running all over the place. Not guarded, not measured, not secured, not diagrammed, nothing. The defense goes through the SERT final mission report, almost line by line, and says, is that accurate? Then they get to the final entry, which was the victim was hit and dragged by a vehicle. And the witness needed then to refer to the report in order to answer the question as to whether or not that was even in there. So Yannetti shows him the report. He looks at the report and says, well, yeah, I did enter that in there. And this is weird. Not that he's admitting to entering it in there. And we don't know whether he recalls entering that in there or whether he looks at it and assumes he must have entered it in there because it's on there and it has his name on it. But the SERT's mission is simply to find evidence. They're there just to assist and find evidence. Their goal is not to come to a conclusion. So the only thing I can think of as to why that would be there is if the police department who's asking for that service tells them this is why you're here. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. It's just really weird. Nobody marked off where the body was located. It was Tully who told the team where the offending vehicle was parked, except Tully could not have seen that. He wasn't there. And now I have a question. Did the original statements to the police say this? Did they talk about this? I can't remember if that's come in at trial or not. And O'Hara said he was told specifically to look for a sneaker. Was he told to look for John's hat? Did they find his baseball cap? Well, it sounds like at this search, they did not. So where is that? The defense again asked about the adult male coming out from the house. The witness confirmed it. They didn't really go any further with that. And the defense described sort of the process of sifting through snow and photographing, the removal of each layer and blah, 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 like you would see a CSI team do. But this is not a CSI team. So this poor witness is on the stand being asked questions that should be asked of a CSI, not him. Their training is very different. Their role is very different. Why on earth was there no CSI team? And the defense got into asking him, you said there was evidence within a foot or two from other pieces of evidence, but your earlier testimony said a few inches. And they went back and forth about this, whether it was inches or feet, that sort of thing. And the witness is saying, look, I disagree with your distances. You're saying 3 feet. And the defense said you found red plastic on the roadway, left of the flagpole, then 3 feet south, you found the sneaker, and the witness is saying, I don't know that that's accurate. And then you found plastic a few feet south of the sneaker, and the guy says, I don't know what the distance was. And the defense is saying, then several feet south, again, you found more. And the witness says, I don't agree on those distances. Well, if the scene had been properly diagrammed and photographed and measured and things done to scale and things done properly, heck, if it was done halfways properly, everybody would be in a better position to know and understand and to start to interpret all of this. The witness agreed he found items under the snow. Well, yeah, it had been snowing for 8 hours. And the defense said, you testified that you found 6 or 7 pieces of plastic. The witness says, yes. And the defense's problem with this is very imprecise. We're talking about evidence collection. But in defense of the witness here, this was not the witness's job. His job was not to count or remember how many pieces of evidence or what they were, any of that. It wasn't his job to collect it, to log it, to make diagrams. It wasn't his job. Tully was the one supposedly doing the evidence log. This witness only mapped 3 pieces of evidence, and they were not feet away from each other. This witness didn't see the evidence log at all. And this witness never saw any of these photos until a week ago. The defense said, I'm going to give you a number of dates, and then I'm going to ask you a question. And he said, here are the dates: February 3rd, 4th, 8th, 10th, 11th, and 18th. On any of those dates, did Trooper Proctor call you back to do another search? And the answer was no. On redirect, Lally said, so the cruiser GPS is what enabled you to be able to say what time each team member arrived. And the answer was yes. I think this witness did testify truthfully to the best of his knowledge and ability, which is all we can expect of any witness. And before anyone gives O'Hara or the SERT team a hard time about how they went about what they did, you've got to remember what they do is very different from CSI. And it was the responsibility of others to properly diagram, properly photograph, log, all of that, properly collect this evidence, and they did not. And as for the search itself, again, if you're doing a search and rescue, this kind of search is fine. In fact, if you're looking for evidence because you need to do a search and rescue, you're not sifting for hours and hours and hours, because if somebody needs your assistance, then time is important. They are different things. So if there's criticism to be pointed at anyone, it is not Lieutenant O'Hara, in my opinion. I did find him to be a credible witness, and I don't believe that he had anything to do with any kind of conspiracy or cover-up or anything like that. The guy was called out to do a job. He went out and did his job. What everybody else does or fails to do is not in his control. The next witness was Maureen Hartnett. She's a forensic scientist, has been for the last 8 years. She worked for the State Crime Lab in the criminalistics unit. Lally spent a long time going through her training and lingered a little longer on her training in respect to blood samples. And some of what she does is responds to scenes and documents. Well, how come nobody called her to the scene at Fairview? That might have been helpful. And you know, at the scene at Fairview, this woman's training in blood stain pattern analysis might have been helpful. And Lally took forever going over her training and accreditation. I understand they need to show that a witness is qualified, but he really lingered a long time, and it became clear later why he did this. At one time, this witness failed a proficiency test and then had to go into remediation in order to correct the problem so that she could pass that proficiency test. And the test was specifically in relation to analyzing human hair. Well, people make mistakes at work, and that is the purpose of remediation. The weight of this issue in relation to this case is going to depend on when she failed the test and when she subsequently passed. When she was being asked these questions, she was pretty straightforward about it. And that's got to be tough, especially if you have to testify in a trial that's televised. I mean, to sit there and publicly have to say, yep, I failed this thing. Here's what I did wrong. And knowing how judgmental people are, I mean, that had to be tough, but she handled it well. Lally asked her about how many examinations she's done related to motor vehicles, and she said 65. Well, my question is when? 65 as of now? 65 prior to her examination of this vehicle in this case? I don't know. He had her go through explaining blood screening and confirmatory tests, explaining that QLIM means quantity limited. He really took a long time for all of this, and I don't know if that's Lally just taking a long time, because there are other things that he just glosses right over that you'd think would require a little more time or explanation. You know, it made me wonder. There's that old thing about sandwiching a negative. You know, if you criticize somebody, you're supposed to say something nice first, then give the criticism, and then say something nice so that negative thing gets buried between a bunch of other stuff. And Lally going on and on like this made me wonder if that was a possibility, that this is what he's doing, but I'm not in his head, so I don't know. On February 2nd, this witness responded to Canton Police Department at 9 a.m. Troopers Proctor and Dunn were there, as was Clark, who is with Crime Scene Services, and she said he was photographing and she doesn't know if he did anything else. Where they responded to was the Canton Police Department garage. She said she examined the SUV. She took notes at the time, so that's a bonus that they're not taken after the fact. Lally hands her some documents and she looks at it and she says, well, yes, these are mine, but there's missing information here. I guess he was just interested in the diagrams. They talk about this diagram that she made of a Lexus LX 570 black. The location was the CPD garage, and they put up the diagram, and she refers to her notes and says there was damage to the rear passenger side, so a dent in the trunk doors, scratches on the bumper, and a broken taillight. And she said she found a hair near the quarter panel, pieces of glass on the rear bumper, and those things were packaged and taken to the lab. Well, I got questions now. How does something like that stay on there? Was the hair and the glass embedded? Well, we're going to find out in a minute. If the incident involving this vehicle occurred at 12:30 or so on January 29th, and then the accused drives away, maybe parks in the garage, maybe doesn't. The vehicle's covered in snow. She's driving it around the next day. It's a blizzard. There's wind, there's snow. How does a hair stay there? How does glass just sit nicely on the bumper? I mean, they were talking about the wind was howling. So this is weird. So I'm watching this waiting to maybe it's, just embedded right in the vehicle. The witness said that inside the vehicle, there were boxes on the back seat and clothing and miscellaneous items in the trunk. Well, we do know that Reed picked up something at John's house. Now, I don't know whether she put that in her vehicle or whether they were loaded into her father's vehicle, if these are the same items. Who knows? They show photos of the lights. They show photos of the taillight. And I noticed the crime scene tape there. I didn't see it in earlier photos, but that may simply be because of the angles of the photos. And, of course, because nothing has flippin' dates or anything on it. Those earlier photos, I don't know when they were taken, so maybe they were taken after. Who knows? The witness said she was informed that the investigation was in respect to a hit and run. She did testing, and this was good. She did testing on the undercarriage, the exhaust pipe, and the tire flaps. And she did blood screening on all of that, which is great because if it was a hit and run and he'd been dragged, or if he'd hit the undercarriage, very often hairs and fibers and blood, things get stuck in that undercarriage. Sometimes you can go through a car wash and that stuff still doesn't come out. But all of that tested negative. There was nothing on the undercarriage. Well, if he'd been hit and dragged, I'd expect to see something on the undercarriage before I'd expect to see a hair on a quarter panel. But hey, I am not a CSI. She said she collected the taillight housing and they showed a photo of glass on the rear bumper. And I expected to see some tiny little fragment that got wedged somewhere. But there was a big old chunk of glass there. How does that not fall off? And I want to know about the tow truck that was used. Was this a flatbed truck? How does that not fall off during towing, during a blizzard, during clearing your car, in the wind? How does that not come off? They showed a photo of where the hair was found. And again, how does that stay there? But you know what? Unless it had blood on it, it actually doesn't mean a lot. She parked her vehicle in O'Keefe's garage. She and O'Keefe were around the vehicle. It would be so easy for hair to transfer onto or into that vehicle. There would be any number of transfer points for that hair to get there. So by itself, it doesn't mean anything. So John's hair is on her vehicle. You expect his hairs to be around. Well, if that hair somehow remained stuck there through a blizzard, who's to say how long before that it was stuck there? And they show a picture of the inside of the vehicle, and I have to laugh because Lally has been trying to get out that there is a screen there. I think he wants to point out there's a backup screen. So how could she back up into anything by accident if there's a backup camera? Well, you know what? I know somebody who does it all the time in spite of having a backup camera. And if you're panicked, yeah, you could back up into something if you're not in your right head. And to argue the flip side, I could say if you're really drunk, you might not be attentive to that backup camera. And I'm wondering, did they get the computer system out of the SUV? I guess we'll have to wait for that. And they showed a photo of the back of the trunk, and there are miscellaneous items in there. I note also that there is a snow brush on top of some of the miscellaneous items, and I have some ideas as to where the prosecution might try to go with that, but it's so far-fetched that I don't want to say, unless he actually goes there. They showed photos of the rear passenger side of the vehicle, and she spoke of how the damage wrapped around the light. So it looks like the corner of that light maybe struck something, and she shows where there are some minor scratches. She did scrape some of the paint off the vehicle to do testing on that. I didn't hear her say anything, though, about checking for paint transfer. And Lally goes through the process of proper evidence collection with this witness, which I found laughable given that everything is already tainted at this point. It doesn't matter how perfect she is at this point because it's already tainted before she even got there. She said she couldn't remove the housing, so an officer helped her. They talked about whether or not she used gloves. She said she did. She doesn't recall whether the officer used gloves. And she said she was given a broken drinking glass. She was given Solo cups with frozen red-brown stains. Well, when you look at the old photos, they weren't frozen. They were liquid, so they got refrozen. She said she let the liquid thaw and she took swabs, and she left the cups with Canton PD to let them store it however they want. And at this point, I was still thinking, what about his clothes? And what about the items recovered from Fairview from that search? And that wasn't mentioned yet. And it seemed odd because this would be the time to mention it, but okay. He asked her about examining the taillight back at the lab, and she explained what she did. First, she said she did no testing on the taillight. And she said the reason why is because there would be limited material because this vehicle had been out in a blizzard and was towed through a blizzard. And so there would just be limited material on the taillight. But then she said she did take a DNA swab of the taillight. So two different things, and the reasoning is all just seems contradictory. They show photos, and in one photo you can see the backside of the light, and I noticed that it's not indented. They talk about the hair, and she said that the entire sample gets used up. It's a Q lim, like it's a quantity limited. So this raises questions in my mind about the defense being able to independently test, but it might not matter. I mean, if it's John O'Keefe's hair, it still is on a place where it's expected to be or is not unreasonable to be. The length of the hair was 7/8 of an inch long. She didn't do testing herself on the hair. She sent it to the DNA unit. And then they discuss clothing and that she would examine clothing. Then Lally's asking what she looked for, and she said she looked for blood, trace collection, skin cell samples, damage analysis, and they've launched into the issue of the clothing without ever stating where she got it, how she got it. It seemed like she got it from Canton PD, but how did they get it if it went to the hospital? The chain of custody of this evidence is unclear. The explanation is non-existent. And I want to know why the judge allows for this just to pop in like this without laying that out. How did it get there? Who had it? It went from where to where to where to where. And then Lally went back to the hair, and she said the hair could have come from any area of the body. They don't say or even try to figure out which part of the body that hair came from. And then they get into the clothes. And this is a whole other conversation, and it's got to be a whole other video. So that's all I've got for you for the moment. Trust your gut. I'll see you in the comments.